everybody. It's so lovely to be here. So as Panina's kind introduction, my name is Diana, and I am currently Sky Group's Data Ethics Lead. So I must confess that partly I drew inspiration for this title from the very famous self-help book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Unfortunately, I'm not, I don't really have that insight to share with you today, but I did want to acknowledge the fact that for lots of roles in innovation, ethics, e-commerce, it's really crucial to carve out your own place and figure out ways to make an impact through collaboration and partnerships. And that's what I'm going to try and talk to you today about. So my intention is it's two things. One is to get all of you to share some examples and think about how we define data ethics. It's a new buzzword, and we've spoken about what happened to sustainability and innovation and how they can sometimes be misconstrued. And my argument is that actually data ethics as a concept has been around for a while, and a lot of us in different organizations have a role to play in it. And my second intention for today is to hopefully share some of my lessons learned when it comes to scaling some of the responsible data practices within a massive organization. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit about, I guess, the definition that I use, how I try to define success, some of the strategies that I found to be quite helpful in scaling some of these practices, and leave you with some parting thoughts. And yes, obviously, I would love some questions at the end. Before I delve into my first slide, I would like to see a show of hands. How many of you would feel comfortable offering a definition on data ethics? 2, 3? Okay. Would you like to share it publicly?
Yeah, I mean, ethics itself is the study of what's right and wrong. Data ethics is a systematic accounting of how you avoid doing wrong and how you do right when thinking about data, generally personal data, when companies and governments are thinking about it, but it's ethics applied to data. And to the extent that we know what ethics is, we can know what data ethics is.
I like it. Thank you. Thank you. Any other guesses? It's hard to follow up on that. Yeah. Very well done. Yeah, I think that's true. I think what I tried to do when I just landed this role is go to different parts of the organization across different levels and ask people what they really care about when we talk about data ethics. And then to add some credibility, I took the definition from the Oxford Internet Institute. So I think Luciano Floridi was the one who, him and his collaborator coined the paper, What Do We Mean by Data Ethics? And he defines data ethics in 3 groups. So the ethics of data, algorithms, and ethics of practices. So ethics of data, I think it's something that you already referred to. It's something that we, as customers, as individuals, probably have a notion of as somebody who, shares their data online with different entities out in the marketplace. It's interesting to talk about data scientists, data quality, machine learning engineers, different kind of data people, because they often kind of ask me for a very specific checklist, and we talk about the data lifecycle, and where it all starts is really the procurement piece of, okay, so we know we're buying data of these data brokers, of these massive data companies, are we acting ethically? And here's my point around, we're already making ethical choices, so, we have decided that we don't really need to know about the diversity of this data set, or we have decided that it's okay to be analyzing and merging these data sets because the legal department said that's fine, the GDPR allows it. So ethics of data is very broad, and the bit that I'm really, really excited about when we talk about the narrowest definition is the fact that ideally you should be able to build better customer trust through further transparency around responsible data practices. And I will get to that later in the presentation. There have been more studies and more streams of thought around how best to go there. But that's the kind of one aspect of data ethics that I find particularly very exciting. Then, I think we've had some amazing presentations today from Catherine and others who specialize in ethics of machine learning. And I think it probably doesn't require all that much explaining. It seems to be the kind of the buzzword of this year, ethics of algorithms. And then finally, ethics of practices, where we talk about responsible innovation. And working for a company that's very product-driven, a lot of the work consists of bringing different frameworks. So, for example, earlier this year, the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, have launched a set of principles for responsible design and development of products. So, these sorts of conversations around how do you bring inclusivity, accessibility, and ethics into product design and development. And then there are some other broader ethical practices. Okay, moving on from the definition. I think we've probably touched upon it earlier, and I think Stephanie here had an amazing presentation. But I think one of the paradoxes of doing ethics and being an ethicist is that, well, success is not that easy to define, and it comes with its own set of challenges. So we talk about kind of ethical outcomes as individuals in the company or kind of broader ecosystem knowing what's right and being able to follow the right ethical norms. However, as I mentioned, there's something to the fact that we all already make certain ethical choices in our day-to-days. And actually, if I were to do my job well, I would not have a job anymore because, people would know what the right and the wrong thing is. And oftentimes, we talk about ethics as a practice. So what might be right for you might not be right for your colleague because we all have different values. So it's not as easy always to define that specific outcome, which is, where expertise comes in. And so in ethics of machine learning, we talk about different fairness frameworks. And the example that I like to hear and use is the fact that depending on your, social values, you might or might not think that it's right to provide better insurance premiums to potentially more affluent or older customers. Some people will say that is completely fine. So that kind of expertise in actually providing frameworks and making people comfortable enough to share some of your values. And I think that does kind of tie in with that earlier speech today from Stephanie around kind of ethics as a practice. And then I think kind of last but not least, so we talk about defining what ethical is, working with people to, co-develop some of these ethical frameworks. And then last but not least, that network engagement, which I'm going to spend most of the next 15 minutes talking about, which is about finding allies and finding friends, and understanding where data ethics as a concept might land in a massive organization. So here is my framework for making friends. Nothing too controversial, I don't think. So number one item would be to understand different engagement strategies, which really, and I'll delve into each of these specifically, but really point number one is about understanding current governance structures and how you can strengthen those. Point number two is about being fairly innovative, because it is an innovative area. As we earlier found, people will have different definitions of what you're supposed to be doing or not doing. So I think it's about being bold and trying to test different use cases. And last but not least, we've heard about kind of customer trust as one of the key drivers of change in the broader kind of e-commerce and business. And so I'll try and share my findings on what seems to build customer trust when it comes to data practices in a massive corporate. So yeah, engagement strategies. So for a lot of you who seem to either kind of often engage with a C-suite or tend to define your own strategies, you probably find that there is something called a corporate narrative. If your legal department seems to be quite modern, you probably have something called a privacy by design framework, privacy by design approach. And you probably have a way in which your corporate affairs brand would measure trust and would benchmark you against your competitors. And so this is where data ethics should play a part in as well. So how do you the three most common narratives for scaling data ethics are it supports upcoming regulation, it builds customer trust, it helps with the compliance piece, and it supports brand worth. So depending on, I guess, an organization's position, the kind of step number one is to understand, which of the narratives is optimal for your brand and kind of for your company. Sort of the point number two is about that idea that frameworks and toolkits are gonna set some standard across the company. So depending on, again, what part of data ethics you're working in. Is it kind of the data governance? Is it ethics? Is it product? There are all sorts of different toolkits and frameworks that probably your middle management will be thinking about developing. So that kind of engagement strategy should tackle some of the questions of what is the right set of principles or right ways of working when it comes to being ethical with your data across some of these different business functions. Sounds fairly straightforward. And then last but not least, that kind of cultural change piece I find most interesting, but also most difficult. Some organizations will have employee-led networks. We have one called the Digital Ethics Network. And so we tend to convene the community, organize talks, and kind of act as a community of practice and let people get involved and voice some of their opinions. So that kind of cultural change piece is about creating a critical mass of individuals who would probably want to work with you and support your frameworks and support your positions on the side of their job. So it kind of does take an army, is kind of the summary of this slide. KPIs. I did mention the fact that data ethics are a network ethics, and I did find some comfort in the fact that there is this legal language that sometimes is quite helpful to refer to when you talk about the principles of accountability, transparency. So a lot of the principles that you would see in AI ethics statements are the ones that you would probably see in lots of kind of GDPR documents and promises. So, it's helpful that these things exist. What's also helpful is kind of going beyond just the kind of legal and data protection narrative and reaching into kind of the day-to-day of data lifecycle. So things like having a consistent set of principles, things like having clear, compliance targets. They're not like very sexy terms, but they do help a lot of teams work together. So they support cross-team collaboration. They support the kind of general ways of working when you're launching a massive product or you're kind of engaging into any of the larger, digital transformation strategies. I mentioned the brand impact. So it's about understanding how you can work with corporate affairs. Is there a place in the corporate narrative to kind of help build that trust with the customers? And I also think, a number of people in product development, depending on how much data sharing or how much data is being collected, they will have their questions. So being able to come to product developers and say, actually, I want to get you involved. I don't want to just give you a checklist that you probably don't understand. I want you to come and create a privacy strategy with me together. I mean, a lot of people will respond well to that. Obviously, there's always going to be conflicting priorities. But being able to go to a very kind of driving department and sharing some frameworks and ask them to get involved, I found it's actually quite an interesting experience. So I do think, here are some of the examples of potential collaborators. You can probably find many more, depending on, again, type of the organization and your focus. But yeah, I guess just being aware of how already you probably have a number of kind of KPIs that other people are doing for you is a really good way to think about data ethics and kind of growing data ethics within the organization. So stats. I sometimes show stats from the McKinsey research, from the IPG media brand research, and they're great. It's good to see what's happening in the industry. The one on the very left-hand side talks about how a number of consumers would consider AI policies and data privacy policies before purchasing a product. The one in the middle talks about the fact that a number of consumers would reward companies with responsible data practices with a 28% increase in purchase intent. And they would also tend to trust that company more and favor that company, etc. But I don't think there's nothing as effective as actually going and talking to your customers directly. So I think in order to support that hypothesis that responsible data practices are going to build company trust, first you need to understand what builds trust in your industry. Second, you need to understand how different segments feel about different data practices. Some of these research studies, they merged kind of key data practices, and they talked about pretty much 4 or 5 practices. They talked about third-party data sharing, data collection, data analysis and transparency on data analysis, and data retention. So understanding what your customer segments care about, and then also understanding what does that mean? So what? So, 60% of our Gen Z customers will or will not care if we share your data with this third party. What happens next? And so what we've tried to do is, do some A/B testing, but also try to ask pointed questions around, historically, if you had found the company to exhibit this or that data practice, did you change your behavior? Did you abandon that contract? Did you think about it? Did you just move on? And I personally, obviously, as somebody working in this space, find it very encouraging that actually more and more customers would act on their promises and they would act on their strongly expressed opinions. So they would walk away from companies that seem to be very unethical with their data practices. And then having that clear understanding of, again, kind of where's the industry, where are your customer segments, what are specific data practices they care or do not care about, and how would they reward you for being more transparent and more ethical. That's that sweet spot from which then, as an organization, you can start promising things and building frameworks and engaging with your customers directly. So that's the summary. Obviously, it helps to be a nice person and understand people that you're working with. But what I found to work quite well for me as data ethicist is first of, as I said, understanding the existing governance frameworks and structures, understanding the obviously objectives of different data teams, product teams, compliance teams, corporate affairs teams. And then finally understanding, what is it that your key users care about and how can we help them, and in doing so, increase that customer trust and increase that brand perception and all the other great business benefits that should come on the back of having responsible data practices. So that's me for today. Thank you so much for listening.